Why are there so many BMW M3 fanboys out there? Is it really such a great car, or is it just a load of hype? Well, in this video, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about the BMW M3, going all the way back to the very first model from 35 years ago. I'm Matt Watson, and you're watching Carwow.
Buying a new car? Then head to Carwow, and my team will help you find your next car at a fair price. Carwow, your one-stop car buying comparison site.
The original BMW 3 Series from 1975, that's the E21 for all you BMW nerds, never had an M3 version. That means that the most powerful 3 Series you could buy back then was a 323i, and it only had 141 horsepower. But this changed when the new E33 Series came along in 1983, because BMW wanted to go racing, and 141 horsepower just wasn't enough for a racing car, obviously. So BMW called on legendary German engineer Paul Roscher to design a new engine. Paul really knew his stuff. He made the engine for the earlier BMW 2002 Turbo, and he made some of Brabham F1 cars' engines in the early 1980s. He was also the guy who made the McLaren F1 engine. Anyway, Roscher took the cylinder head from the M1 supercar, that's the top bit of the engine with all the valves and stuff in it, and just cut 2 cylinders off. Then he attached it to the E30's 4-cylinder engine block to make a 2.3 litre engine with 200 horsepower. And this new car didn't just get a new engine, it also got a load of new body panels. In fact, the only bits on the E30 M3 shared with the normal E30 were its bonnet and its roof. The wheel arches were wider, it had a higher boot lid with a new spoiler, and even the rear windscreen was different. And there were loads of special versions of this car too. There was the Evo 1, the Europameister, the Cecotto, the Sport Evolution, and the Roberto Ravaglia. There was even a special version built for Italy that had a 2-litre engine to sneak through some kind of Italian tax loophole. And you could buy a convertible version of the E30 M3 too, although fewer than 800 of those were ever made. The ultimate version was the Sport Evolution. This got a 2.5 litre 4-cylinder engine with 238 horsepower, and you wouldn't believe how much these cars are worth nowadays. £80,000. That's more than a brand new M3 starts at. But more on that car later. The next M3 after the E30 was the E36. This came out in 1992, and it was the first 6-cylinder M3 ever. Its 3-litre straight 6 made 286 horsepower. That's almost 50 horsepower more than the most powerful E30 M3 had. That's not all, because BMW also made an Evo version of the E36 M3. This had a 3.2-litre engine with 321 horsepower, and you could also get the E36 M3 as a 4-door saloon for the first time. However, there was no touring estate model. The E36 M3 was a pretty handy racing car, just like the E30 M3 was before it, but people didn't love it as much as the original E30. Some complained that it was a bit too grown up and comfortable for a hardcore M car, and some people even said it was too fast. And another problem was apparently that it looked a bit ordinary. It didn't get any bespoke body panels like the E30, you see, and that meant you could make a bog standard E36 just look like an M3 by fitting on some new wheels, new bumpers, and a pair of those fancy M wing mirrors. And that's not all, because the E36 M3 had another problem, and that was Vanos. Not Thanos, Vanos. Now, Vanos is BMW's name for variable valve timing. The Vanos system changes how the valves work at high revs and helps the engine make loads of power. But it wasn't exactly reliable back in the 1990s, and when Vanos went wrong, it would make the engine run badly and produce much less power. But when it's working properly, an E36 M3 still feels pretty quick today. It'll do 0 to 60 miles an hour in 5.2 seconds. That's faster than some of today's hot hatches. The next M3 on my list is my favourite M3, the E46 from 2000. It combined the E30's more aggressive bespoke body with the E36's speed, and it was one of the best M cars ever. In fact, it was so good that BMW barely changed it the whole time it was on sale. Even though the regular 3 Series got a facelift in 2004, the M3 never did. In the 6 years that it was on sale, all BMW actually did to the car was give it some new LED brake lights in 2002. Anyway, BMW purists will say you want the coupe instead of the convertible, and I'd agree. And you definitely want the manual gearbox instead of the horrible SMG single clutch automatic. Now, that gearbox was basically a manual with a robotic clutch, and it was really violent to drive. But besides the dodgy automatic gearbox, you won't go far wrong with any E46 M3 because it has one of the all-time great engines. It's a screaming naturally aspirated 3.2 litre straight 6 with 343 horsepower. But the E46 M3 reached its peak in 2003 with the incredible CSL version. This had 360 horsepower instead of 343, and it was 110 kilos lighter than a regular E46, thanks to loads of carbon fibre bits, including the roof. Also, the car's airbox was made from carbon fibre as well, and that resulted in a fabulous intake noise. There was a problem. The CSL cost about £20,000 more than a regular M3, but it'll go down as one of the best M cars ever made. Now, only 422 M3 CSLs were ever sold in the UK, so it's really rare. And if you do find one that's in all right condition, you're going to be paying over £60,000 for one. BMW knocked it out of the park with the E46 M3 and its legendary straight six engine, but for some reason it decided to ditch this layout for the next E90 model. The E90 was the first M3 to come with a V8. Well, if you ignore the E46 GTR that also had a V8, but that was a racing car and BMW only built 10 of them, so it doesn't really count. Anyway, the E90 M3, which was actually the saloon, and the E92, which was the coupe, both had a 4-litre V8 with 420 horsepower. And this was sent to the rear wheels via a 6-speed manual gearbox, or a 7-speed dual clutch automatic, which was the first dual clutch gearbox in an M3. And it was much, much better than the horrid old E46's SMG thing. The E90 and 92 also came in more body styles than the E46. Now, as well as the E90 Saloon and the E92 Coupe, you could get an E93 convertible with a folding metal roof. But it added weight, that folding metal roof, and it kind of dulled the performance, so it's definitely not the one to have. Either way, you could get quite a few special editions of the E90 and E92 M3s, and the biggest and baddest version was the M3 GTS. This only came out as a coupe, and it had an even bigger 4.4 litre V8 with 450 horsepower. Now, this car sounded absolutely incredible, and if the exhaust note didn't attract enough attention, you could also get it in bright orange paint. I drove an M3 GTS in a drag race against all other M3 generations, and it was an absolute monster. Now, what I'm going to do is put a link up there, top right hand corner of the screen, should be popping out now. Click on that, you can go watch that drag race video. You'll love it if you're an M3 fanboy. The M3 GTS's V8 engine was an absolute belter, but BMW went back to a straight six for the next model, the F80. However, there was a big change, and that was the fact that for the first time ever, BMW fitted a turbocharger to the M3's engine. The result was 430 horsepower, which is only 11 horsepower more than the old naturally aspirated V8. But it's okay, because power isn't everything. This new engine made nearly 40% more torque than the old V8. It had 550 Newton meters, while the V8 just had 400 Newton meters of torque. So you'd really feel the difference during in-gear acceleration. And competition versions of the new M3 were even quicker because they had an extra 20 horsepower for you to play with, although the torque figure actually stayed the same. But that wasn't the only change for this new F-Series M3, because the M3 Coupe wasn't called an M3 anymore. BMW had just changed the name of the 3 Series Coupe and Convertible to the 4 Series. So the M3 Coupe and M3 Convertible became M4s instead. And I know this list is supposed to be about the history of the M3, but you can't do the history of the M3 without including the M4 as well, especially the M4 GTS. This was a pretty special car, you see. It had loads of engine upgrades, including a water injection system that helped cool the engine and make more power. Speaking of which, the M4 GTS pumped out a huge 500 horsepower, and it got gold alloy wheels, which are always really cool on an M car. But it wasn't all good news for the F80 M3 and F82 M4 though. They had a reputation for being a little bit tricky to drive when wet. And because they all came with turbocharged engines, they never sounded as good as the old V8 M3 or naturally aspirated straight six versions. And their automatic gearboxes had a really temperamental launch control system. Now, I know I go on about this a lot, but it's true. BMW's launch control systems are the worst behaved of the lot in my experience. Anyway, once you got one of these M3s and M4s off the line, they were seriously fast though. The all-new G80 M3 and G82 M4s have just gone on sale, and they're shaping up to be some of the best cars ever. They get a similar 3-litre twin-turbo straight six as the old F80, but with a lot more power. Even the standard car gets 480 horsepower, and the competition version gets 510. These will hit 180 miles an hour and do 0 to 60 in 3.9 seconds, thanks to a new 8-speed torque converter gearbox, which is actually easier to launch because it doesn't suddenly spin up the rear wheels. I know because I've launched the car. In fact, if you want to see my full in-depth video review of the new M4 and how quick it is to 60 and over a standing quarter, put a link up there yet again. Click on that. You can watch my in-depth video review of the new M4. Now the car I actually drove was rear-wheel drive, but you're going to be able to get a four-wheel drive version of the new M4 and M3. Now this will be like the system that you get in the M5, where you can actually disengage the front axle so you can put it into rear-wheel drive if you want to do some big smoky drifts. There's another thing about the new car as well. You're also going to be able to get a touring version of the M3. How cool is that? What's not so cool though is that only the normal version of the M3 and the M4, the rear-wheel drive versions with a lower 480 horsepower, will be available with a manual gearbox, which is a bit of a shame. I'd rather have more choice. The reason for this is that the high-power versions just have too much torque and the gearbox cannot cope, so you have to have them with the automatics. It's just the way it is. Now I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a like. If you click on those windows there, you can actually watch more videos, and if you click on that box there, you can go to carwow to see how much money you can save on a new BMW M3 or M4. Click the link, go check it out. Thanks for watching.